Welcome to Every Dollar Counts with Josh and Jay, a shot of truth serum for your investment and insurance questions. I'm Josh Knoll, the owner of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jay Stubbs, Director of the Gulf Coast for First Protective. We are brought to you on the Gulf Coast Financial Advisors Podcast Network. Jay, my friend, how are you?
Doing great, Josh. It's good to be with you in studio here at Deep Fried with Johnny outside. The weather's nice. The spring is in the air. Going to be some warm weather creeping in, but that also means we're going to go have some fun on the water, I think.
That is right. Yeah, I've already been dipping my toe the last couple of weeks. Not going to lie to you, so I'm enjoying it. This is our time of the year for sure.
Yeah, you need to wear some sunscreen.
Good luck with that. All right, so Jay, for this episode, we're going to be discussing something that has been kind of eating your lunch for the last 45 days, estate and tax planning. You've had a couple cases that you've been up to the weeds, up to your eyeballs in, and you're going to share some information on that, particularly how it may relate to some potential new legislation and some topics related to the passing on of assets in an inheritance type of format. Before we dive into that, though, let's have our friends from Sloth Racer kick us off. All right, quick housekeeping for compliance. Jay Stubbs and First Protective are not affiliated with Prime Capital Investment Advisors, Qualified Plan Advisors, or Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. And Josh Knoll, I am not affiliated with First Protective. So, Jay, the first thing, here's how I want to start this. We're going to be talking about estate planning, and that's a big term that some people have already heard that and say, well, why do I need to listen to that? I don't have an estate. I don't have anything to worry about. I'm going to position that in that I want you to let me know, what is an estate plan and who has, by your definition, who has an estate?
Any of us listening or engaging with, everyone has an estate. So estate planning, Josh, it's for everyone. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how much money you have. You have an estate. And a lot of people avoid it because they say, oh, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have millions of dollars or lots of property or I didn't inherit a bunch of money or whatever. And they don't even consider estate planning an essential step in their overall financial plan because they don't believe it's meant for them. They think it's only meant for the wealthy. Well, it's not. Even if you have just modest assets and other property, a basic estate plan is very essential. Whether you're married or single or widowed or divorced, without an estate plan, you may be leaving your loved ones, children, grandchildren, added stress, costs, significant delays in making sure that the assets pass to the next generation, even if it's just the silver in the drawer that's been passed on from generations before. An estate plan is a vital component to any of the overall comprehensive financial planning that you would sit down and work with an advisor like yourself and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. So what I always like to say is everyone has an estate. And you need to understand, well, what are the components of basic estate planning and how is it key to strengthening my overall position and that which I'm going to leave a legacy. Right. And I don't care if the legacy is $1,000 or $10 million. Everyone has a legacy that they're going to pass on, and that requires estate planning.
Well, very good. So, Jay, let's say this as a little disclaimer. Neither you nor I are estate planning attorneys, right?
We're not, and we're not attorneys. We're not CPAs, right. But we are licensed financial advisors who have relationships with those two types of professions. You have a relationship with Will Stye through Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. I have relationships through the Estate Planning Council with tons of attorneys, and I get my tax alert and legislation updates from those attorneys. We have relationships with CPAs, and we get our tax updates from them as well. And there are other components, even the elder care attorneys, Medicaid attorneys, for those that are looking at that strategy, they don't have a lot of money. Everybody's got some sort of planning, last will and testament type of planning that helps them with their estate.
Yeah, and more often than not, when we're talking about someone as we're doing the estate planning, a lot of times we'll serve on a team. We'll be side by side with an attorney, side by side with the CPA, and we'll be part of that person's team as we're going through the estate plan. So, Jay, what I want to ask you is, what would be some potential benefits of having a proper estate plan And then maybe on the flip side of that coin, what would be possibly some consequences of not having an estate plan?
Well, good question. An estate plan manages your assets in the event of an incapacity or, of course, death. Death is certain, incapacity is uncertain. So think cognitive impairment, or you need some sort of assistance handling your financial affairs. That's where things like a power of attorney would come into play, or a healthcare directive would come into play. What happens if I'm laying in the hospital bed? But that is also considered a part of the estate plan, is those two items there, healthcare directives and powers of attorney. But overall, it ensures that the distribution and the instructions that you want to have for your stuff, your assets, it ensures that it is seamless and it aligns with your intent.
Very good.
What do you want to do with it? Where does it need to go? That's your intent. And it also provides the instructions. What are your final wishes? And most importantly, what are the protections that you're going to put in place for your children, for your grandchildren, for the charities that you love and care for, whether it's a church or a school or any number of them. So that's the benefits, is it makes sure that everything happens as it's supposed to. So you have to get a few documents in order, and we'll talk about the tools and the techniques that you're going to have in a second. But let's talk about without. You asked, what happens if you don't? Well, without a plan, some of the people may not get the things that you wanted them to get, and it may go through probate before they get their hands on it, and that's going to cost. There might be a lot of confusion and conflict among loved ones if there's no written plan in place as to who gets what or what the final wishes are. Be it the Thanksgiving or the Christmas dinner or lunch table or sitting around enjoying the holidays, and let two sisters or two brothers or a brother and a sister bring up what Daddy's supposed to left me and actually left you. We've seen it happen. We've heard about it through different stories. So that an estate plan will get that confusion and that conflict off the table. There may be some transfer taxes, estate taxes at play here. Current legislation is what it is today. We'll go over that in just a minute. But with the current administration possibly making some changes to that, we might have estate erosion. And estate erosion is when we got to pay a bunch of taxes 9 months due in cash after the date of death.
I want to jump in on that, Jay, because we've recorded an episode, it's episode 34, and it was the estate tax exemption and wealth transfer planning. Now, we actually recorded that, memory serves me right, before the election, I think, or immediately thereafter, somewhere in that time period. We were doing some conjecture on what we thought might be some pressures on related to folks with estate, with estate planning needs. And, part of that pressure, we thought maybe there's going to be an exemption that lowers. There might be some other legislation that passes. I wanted to talk to you about something you mentioned to me this morning in our prep, was the deemed sale as it relates to estate planning and how that kind of ties in with some of the pressure that we're seeing from the legislation to maybe get their hands on some additional tax dollars through people's inheritance.
So right now, if you're listening to this podcast, you can go and Google proposed estate tax legislation, and you can all the stuff that they're thinking about doing, reducing the estate tax exemptions and marital deductions, bringing those levels way down, potentially increasing the estate tax percentages, also potentially increasing capital gains tax percentages. But when you look at the thought of a deemed sale, pretend for a minute, or maybe in real life, that you've got a piece of property worth $1 million or more, and perhaps it's got a gain in it. Maybe you bought it for $500,000, and now it's worth $1 million. Or maybe you bought it for $900,000. Think about a home. You bought it for $700,000, and now it's worth $1 million or more. And at death, they're proposing that the sale of the property is deemed on paper, but you actually don't sell it. So what that means is on your final income tax return, Josh, if you have a piece of property worth $1 million or more and you have a basis of $500, to be easy numbers here, that means you've got a gain of $500. But you didn't sell it at death. But for estate tax planning and income tax planning on your final return, they will deem it as to be sold. So now you will have a capital gain tax on the $500,000 gain that you have on that piece of property. But what don't you have? You don't have the liquidity of actually selling, or your family doesn't have the liquidity of actually selling that piece of property. So that is a huge, huge item that really can drive people nuts if it goes into legislation. And we're telling people, hey, be aware of all proposals that are out there. If this thing comes around, people are going to need liquidity at death, whether it's their cash on hand or whether it's through an insurance policy to cover that last component. They may not be in an estate tax situation. They maybe have done the planning to alleviate that, or they may not be at those levels. But if they have a piece of property that's worth a certain amount of value or more in the IRS's eyes, then we might have a capital gains tax on a deemed property sale.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Jane. Again, not CPA here, but what I'm hearing is you're saying that not only did I not sell the property, I also am losing my step up in basis and cost basis.
That's correct.
Okay. So I've got a property that is appreciated. Historically, you got a step up in basis, and off you went. Now you're getting double whammy. The thing's deemed as a sale, and you've lost your step up in cost basis. So, well, without getting in particulars, Jay, what I'd like to ask you then is, I know you've been, as I alluded to in the opener, you've been up to your eyeballs and working on some estate plans. Can you give us maybe some ideas of some of the mechanisms that people are working on to accommodate for this potential new legislation?
Well, there's a lot of things that people might need to be doing. The first thing they need to do is make sure that they have an updated will and last will and testament, and they've got a declaration of what their intent is. And without having that, you run the risk of loss of privacy. You run the risk of having all that confusion. Some people might be looking at trust planning, and I'm not going to go into great detail here for all the different types of trusts that are out there. But for basic trust planning, you've got revocable living trusts that become effective during your lifetime, and you can make revisions to them, and they're ready to go, and they protect your stuff until death. And then there's the irrevocable trust, which is more permanent, and a lot of people use that for the tax savings, asset protection. A lot of people will put a life insurance policy inside.
You see it
of
with farmers a lot.
Yeah, and you'll see a policy inside of there for an irrevocable trust or an irrevocable life insurance trust, and that is basically removing incidents of ownership. So if I've got $1 million that I want to get away or out of my estate, I can use it and put it in an irrevocable trust. Now there's a look back period. The IRS says you have the you've moved this over, but if I die within a 3-year period, I've got a look back period. And then there's testamentary trusts that happen upon death, saying this is where I want these things to go. Last will and testament, power of attorney, healthcare directives, different trusts may be in your overall planning that you're going to need, letters of instruction, and life insurance. If you feel like liquidity is going to be needed, whether it's from estate taxes or this whole deemed sale capital gains tax need, a lot of people are sitting down right now and saying, I need to do this life insurance planning while I'm healthy, while I don't have any hiccups in my health, and I'm making sure that I've got the proper advisors on board, whether it's an attorney and CPA, and they're making those things happen. I've been very busy the last 45, 60 days taking care of some plans because the writing's on the wall, and folks are understanding that this type of planning needs to be done. But understand, some of you listening may not be there yet, or you might be in a situation where you're getting there because you're doing great with your assets and purchases of property, and maybe there's an inheritance down the road. But everyone needs an estate plan. Not everybody might need some of the more advanced planning, but remember, everyone needs an estate plan.
Or, Jay, I'd say, or you are there and you just haven't revisited this thing recently, as in this past year.
Yeah, things need to be updated for sure. We don't just set up an estate plan and set it and forget it. We definitely want to update it as things change and as children get older and as grandchildren come into the world and as business interests come and go. We definitely want to make sure that all of our preparation for where that legacy goes is put in writing and even digitized and stored, so you could then pass it on to the children and make sure that they all see it should there be a premature death that was unexpected.
Well, Jay, let's do this, because estate planning is a big word. It can be intimidating, even for somebody that's gone through the process. A lot of times they're thinking, oh my gosh, I got to revisit it again. Well, yeah. I mean, when we have as much of a whipsaw pendulum swing as we've had with our legislative governing bodies, this is a thing that's vitally important that you keep on top of. But if you don't mind, let's give some folks some practical guides to get started, and then we'll wrap up the show.
So what they would definitely need is they got to work with an attorney. They need to make sure that they get that last will, the durable power of attorney, the healthcare directives. They need to line those up. They need to sit down with a tax professional. A lot of people are good at doing their own taxes, but when it comes to some of the things that they may need to engage a CPA. They need an insurance professional. They may need a trust officer, somebody at a bank, one of their favorite banks, local bank, big bank, mid-regional bank, doesn't matter. All of them are pretty good at having some sort of trust officer, and they need a financial professional involved, a wealth manager, to make sure all of the documentation and all the paperwork is properly titled. And that could be a big deal. They want to set those relationships up. They want to do an initial review, and then once they get the plan in place, they want to do an annual or at least a biannual review. And the 4 primary reasons somebody wants an update in an estate plan: of course, death of a spouse. Husband, wife, somebody passes away, they definitely need to do that. Marriages and divorces, big time to make sure everything gets updated. New life into the world, birth or adoption. And then this happens, a lot, changes in values of the things that you own, whether it's market performance or property or any tangible assets. So that's kind of where you start. And the reasons we know why, the main goal is to have a plan in place and make sure that it moves on without correction or without any confusion.
I would add a 5th thing to that line item. I would add political winds change is a great reason to revisit as well. So, all right, very good. So, listeners, if you're interested in continuing this conversation about estate planning and having a conversation about your team or the network of attorneys and CPAs that Jay and I have access to, you can call us at 251-327-2124, or you can always set an appointment on my website at gulfcoastfa.com. Just click my Calendly app there and you can schedule a time to talk. All you independent and semi-independent advisors and agents out there listening and hearing the value that a Jay Stubbs could bring to your practice, you can find him at jaystubbs.com. That's JAYSTUBBS.com. Jay, once again, we knocked her out. Another podcast session in the books.
I think this takes us over 40-something now.
We are past 40, man. We are almost...
We're experts.
We are, yeah. You are. I'm just hanging on, man. I'm hanging on to your expertise. And Johnny Gwynn, as always, is one of the reasons we've had the ability to produce a professional sounding and engageable show. So many thanks to our producer, Johnny Gwynn, here in Deep Fried Studios, downtown Mobile. Obviously, many thanks to my co-host, Jay Stubbs. And as always, huge shout out to all of y'all that have joined Jay and I on this journey, and to those of you that are joining us now. Do me a favor, please subscribe on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And while you're there, you would be doing us a huge favor if you would rate and review the show. It helps other listeners like you find us. Lastly, if you like the show music, go check out slothracerband.com. That's slothracerband.com. And they're going to take us home now. This has been Every Dollar Counts with Josh and Jay. Advisory services offered through Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, PCIA, a federally registered investment advisor. PCIA, doing business as Prime Capital Wealth Management, PCWM, and Qualified Plan Advisors, QPA. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors is independent of Prime Capital Advisors. Information presented for educational purposes only, is not an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. All investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, be sure to consult a tax professional before implementing any tax or investment strategies.